Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on the Polish solar market. For those listening to us from Poland, witajcie, dzień dobry. The webinar of today is going to have featuring speakers Georg Hotar, CEO of Photon Energy, and Tim Steiner, senior consultant at Enervis. So let's begin. I'm going quickly to guide you through the agenda of today's speakers, as I already mentioned. At the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A, so please have your questions coming in. We will address them to the speakers. Just a brief update about Solarplaza for those who don't know us yet. We are a Dutch company established in 2004. More than 142 events organized now in more than 41 countries related to solar energy with our broad network. And this brings us to one of our next events, which is the Solar Future Poland, which we are organizing on May the 7th in Warsaw. Photon Group among the others, a strategic partner for the event. It's the first international conference covering the Polish market. A lot of topics to be covered, from development to financing perspectives, DSO challenges, and many other auction systems. So let's be in touch. We hope to see you in Warsaw on May the 7th. Regarding the webinar, as I mentioned, if you have any difficulties, please use the or questions, which we'll address at the end. Use the question box. Feel free to do that during the presentation. As I mentioned, at the end, we will address those questions to our speakers. Presentation slides will be available in the How Not section, and we will also send you the recordings and the slides. They will also be available on the website of the Polish event, so you will have the chance to review them after the webinar. Now let's begin. I want to introduce first the first speaker of today, Georg Hotar. He's the co-founder and CEO of Photon Energy Group, which he co-founded in 2008. So Georg, great to have you with us. Acting CEO of the group since 2011, and before that he was involved in financial services across Europe. So I'm now gonna leave the stage to Georg, who's going to cover the outlook of the Polish market. Subsequently, Tim is going to cover the auction system for the Polish market. So lots of content today. Georg, the stage is all yours. So let's begin with your presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to present to you our view on the Polish market, which is quickly becoming one of the most dynamic markets in Europe. Maybe just at the beginning, a few words on our company. Photon Energy was established in 2008, originally in the Czech Republic. So we have been involved in the solar boom of the Czech Republic. Then also we're active in Slovakia very recently. The last couple of years, so we were also very busy in Hungary, which also has become a very attractive market in the region of Central and Eastern Europe. And Central and Eastern Europe is also the major focus of our company. We also have an office in Australia, but Central Europe is basically our home region. We are also a Dutch company today. We're active in over 10 countries. Our business model is that we are downstream integrated, so we get involved in the development of projects in-house, very often in cooperation with other developers, and also sometimes acquire ready-to-build projects, mainly with the view of building them for our own portfolio. So we currently have a portfolio of around 54 megawatts in Central Europe, and a very important part of our business is also operations and maintenance, where we are also serving both our own power plants, but a lot of external customers across the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Slovenia. Our nexus to Poland is actually very old, as we listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange and have been listed since 2008. And now finally conditions in Poland have come to the point where we are in the process of entering the market. We've been analyzing and watching it over the last 2 years. And we are now in the process of opening an office in Warsaw. We've already established the necessary legal entities. And as you can see from the slides, we have customers for O&M and related services all over Europe. But in terms of offices, we're covering the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Romania at this point in time. The Polish market has seen accelerating growth in the last couple of years, and the latest data that came in is that as of February 1st, nearly 1.5 gigawatts of solar have been installed, and January has actually been the busiest month in history. So with 173 megawatts added, which represents a year-on-year. The installed base has grown over the last 12 months by 180%. So it's very dynamic growth, of course, from a very low base, but it is very dynamic. Looking at the total installed base of renewable sources, that stands almost exactly at 6 gigawatts, and the vast majority of the balance is wind. So wind power has been deployed in Poland for, I think, the last 15 years, with waves of, just like in our industry, we have the solar coaster. I think a similar development was also in wind. So there have been periods when wind has been very strong, a lot of development and deployment, followed by regulatory changes. And also in the last 2 years, regulatory changes have led to a slowdown of the development of new wind capacity. However, in the auctions that have been taking place on an annual basis in the last 4 years, wind has been playing a leading role in terms of capacity, but also energy volume. So it has been the dominant technology based on projects whose development started several years ago. Based on our information, it takes 5 to 6 years to develop a wind project in Poland. So solar has been the new kid on the block. It has been included in the last 4 auctions, the last of which took place at the end of last year. And the vast majority of projects was in the so-called 1 megawatt basket. So that the maximum number of the maximum size of projects was limited to 1 megawatt DC capacity. So all those solar projects that have won auctions, with the exception of, I think, around a handful that were also in the large basket, have been in the 1 megawatt category. And in terms of utility scale projects, this is where all the development effort in Poland has been focused on in the last couple of years, and of course also in terms of systems deployed. Could maybe quickly go to the next slide. You can see the accelerating dynamics. So at the end of 2017, the market stood at 280 megawatts of the total installed capacity, almost doubling in 2018, ending 2019 at 1.3 gigawatts. And as mentioned earlier, in January alone, that number grew by another 13% to 1.47 gigawatts. When we look at the market, and we are still in the process of entering the market, we mainly think from the point of view of a developer investor. And our conclusion, our decision has basically been that we will not focus our efforts on the 1 megawatt project class destined for auctions. And here, I think it's important to mention that there's one more auction stipulated for this year, which most likely will take place again at the very end in December. There have been, as far as I understand, some unconfirmed rumors that there may be a second auction in the middle of the year, but maybe my colleague will later on have more recent information on that. So one more auction that will focus on the 1 megawatt projects will take place at the end of the year. Looking at the price development in the auctions, and here I'd just like to mention that what is auctioned are actually 15-year contracts for difference. So there's no feed-in tariff. It's a contract for difference for 15 years. Those prices have been coming down quite significantly, while energy prices, particularly over the last year, have gone up significantly. I think here it's important to bear in mind that the energy mix in Poland, the generation mix, is heavily geared towards coal, so up between 75 and 80% of electricity are generated from coal, and the costs of generation have been strongly impacted by the rising cost of CO2 certificates. And as a result, today, average energy prices and the prices achieved in the auctions have converged. So the difference between market prices and the contracts for difference have basically reached the same level, which is something we have seen also in other markets. So, for example, at the same time, around the same time at the end of last year as in Poland, there was also the first auction in Hungary where we participated, and there we have basically also seen in the large scale basket, the largest projects, the winning projects, or the most aggressive bidders offering below the market average price, which is also the reference price for the contract for difference. So very similar trends. And on that basis, in our view of the market, we want to focus very strongly on larger scale projects that will give us more optimized investment costs, and as a result, also lower levelized cost of energy. I would like to also mention one thing, and that is that of the installed capacity in solar today, only a relatively small fraction of around 25% are projects that have won the auctions. So there is obviously a delay in the deployment, but this dynamic growth that you see has been strongly driven by small installations. There is a specific support mechanism for installations up to 50 kilowatt peak for so-called prosumers. That means users that have or system owners that consume a significant part of the generated energy. So the driving force over the last 2 years has been mainly these small installations, and the utility scale is only slowly starting to contribute to that growth. So as I mentioned, for us, we view that the projects in the auctions, that not only that the winning bids are more or less equal to the market prices, but at the same time, we feel that the conditions in the auctions for the systems in the auctions are actually not really supporting the most efficient type of systems. So as one is limited to 1 megawatt of DC capacity, so not AC but DC capacity, the systems are relatively small. One of the issues that we have come across is that the concept of overbuilding, that means having a higher DC capacity on a given level of AC capacity is a relatively new concept in Poland, and that the utilities, the DSOs, are only slowly warming up to that idea. And of course, relatively, at least in installations as we do them, we try to work with relatively aggressive DC AC multiples. So that's a challenge. And in the market in general, where however we do see willingness by the DSOs to discuss this topic. Apparently now new regulations are coming that will allow a 1.2 to 1 ratio, but we hope that there will be further improvements on that front. But projects that go into the auctions are strictly limited to 1 megawatt DC. Therefore, leading to higher levelized costs of energy. Another feature that we see in projects in Poland is that the vast majority of projects has actually been developed on rented land, and that land rental is relatively expensive given the economics of projects. So for these 1 megawatt projects, typically the annual rental for the land used for the construction is in the region of 5,000 euros, sometimes even higher. And on top of that, very often there is also relatively high tax burden in the form of real estate tax, which tends to double that number. So cost related to land usage is very often equal to at least approaching 10,000 euros. So given a specific performance of systems around 1,000, apparently there are some systems that have been reaching 1,100 and higher. But again, in the context of auction prices in the region of 70 to 80 euros per megawatt hour, leading to annual revenues of, let's say, 75 to 80,000 euros, 10,000 euros just for land usage is a significant drag on the economics. So this is one of the issues that we see in Poland, and in our future development efforts, we will definitely, wherever possible and economically sensible, try to buy the land, because the multiples compared to the annual rents in the market seem to make that a financially viable route. I think my colleague after me will also talk about energy market prices. As has been mentioned, there's been a significant growth in prices, which I think it appears took a lot of medium-sized and large energy users by surprise, and there appears to be a lot of interest among co-producers to fight this trend of rising prices. And there's a lot of buzz around corporate PPAs in the Polish market. As far as we are aware, there have been very few concluded so far, but it's definitely an area to watch out for, and this also appears to be probably the most viable option for developing larger scale projects outside the framework of the auctions. And this is definitely also a path that we are going to go down in our asset development. Another area that is an important aspect is that system balancing costs in Poland are relatively low, so €1 and less per megawatt hour, which again, for example, contrasts very favorably with some of the other markets where we are active or looking at. In Hungary, we're now currently looking at more like 7 to 10 euros. So on that front, the Polish market is actually very, very attractive. longer term, as more and more larger scale projects will get developed, second, definitely the industry will bump into limits on the grid, which is in the need of additional upgrades. And I think those of you who have been following the recent EU level discussions about the Green Deal have definitely seen that Poland is dragging its feet on meeting the 2050 target of carbon neutrality, and has negotiated an extension until 2070. But despite this, the EU is willing to commit significant resources for grid upgrades for Poland to enable Poland's transition. And of course, starting with a 75 to 80% share of coal generation, there is a long way to go. So from our point of view, Poland is definitely an extremely interesting market. Our view is that energy prices are at a level where, if one is able to develop and build power plants at industry-leading prices with the lowest possible levelized cost of energy, we believe that power plants today already can be built without the need of auctions. And in our strategy, we're of course looking at the possibility of PPAs, but we're also considering going fully merchant, which of course will also depend to a large extent on the willingness of project financiers to go down this route.
Definitely. Georg, thank you very much. Very, very insightful, and glad that you pointed out especially the role of regulation in the Polish market, where we start from a very disadvantageous, I would say, energy generation mix. So thank you very much for touching also that topic, and good to learn about your prospects. Before deep diving with Tim into the topic of the auctions, I would just like to remind the audience, please feel free to send us your questions. After Tim's presentation, we will address them to the speakers. So please use the tool, send in your questions if you have any regarding the Polish market. At this stage, I would say we are ready to pass on the conversation to Tim. Tim, good to have you. Tim is a senior consultant who joined Enervis, a German firm, in 2013, focuses mostly on asset valuation of renewable energies, bidding strategies, and of course, is an expert in power market modeling. And he curates the Polish power market outlook by Enervis. Tim, good to have you. I'll leave you the stage, so we are ready to deep dive into the auction system. Tell us more when it comes to prices, and what can people expect when bidding in a market like Poland.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. First of all, thanks for having me, and good afternoon to the listeners at this webinar. Yeah, as Georg already pointed out, we see a very dynamic development in Poland at the moment, mostly in the segment of large-scale PV. And what I want to talk to you about today is the particularities in the Polish CFD auction, and our view on the future role of large-scale PV and yeah, the market surrounding in Poland at this moment. Maybe just a few words about Enervis. So Enervis is a European energy market consultancy. We're focusing mainly on European power and gas markets. In power markets, we provide our customers with long-term outlooks on yeah, power price development, capture price development for different asset classes, so renewable energies, onshore wind, offshore wind, PV, but also asset management and asset valuation services for also conventional power plants, transaction consultancy and services, market entries, and also bidding strategies for tender systems. In the Polish market, we're active since 2015. There we partnered up with Christian Schnell from Sullivan. He's a lawyer in Poland and the real expert in the market. And together with Christian, we're able to provide a pretty holistic view, I would say, not only from the power market perspective and the economics itself, but also from the regulatory view, from the permission process view, pitfalls, timing, cost, and a pretty deep insight into the Polish market pipeline outlook and also tender system.
Tim, sorry, I'm just jumping with a technical question. Sorry, you have control of the slides, so please feel free to shuffle for your presentation. Just wanted to make sure it was
yeah, sure. I know.
Perfect.
I was about to change the slide right now. Okay.
That's great.
So I'm going to talk about many of the things that Georg already mentioned, but maybe in a more deep dive. And I hope it's not going to be too technical, but I must say that the Polish auction system itself is one of the most complicated that I know of in European markets. So maybe with the Spanish system and also the Dutch system, I think it is one of the most complicated. And what we see at this stage is that many developers, but also banks and investors, did not fully understand to the full extent how the remuneration system works. And this is something I'm going to cover in the next couple of minutes. But first of all, let me talk to you about the recent outcomes of the CFD tender rounds that we saw in the past years. So what you see on this slide is, Georg already told you that there are two baskets at the moment for these tender rounds. The first one is for projects below 1 megawatt, and the second one, the large basket, is for installations bigger than 1 megawatt. And the particularities in Poland are the following: that these auctions are supposed to be technology neutral. So both onshore wind and PV are competing in these tenders in these different baskets. And what is auctioned is a 15-year CFD contract. So depending on your strike price and what you're earning on the market, you either get the difference to the strike price, or you have to pay it back later on. But we will cover this in more detail in a couple of minutes. So what you see on the charts here is the bidding price and cutoff price development for the two auctions. And since these auctions are designed as pay-as-bid auctions, it's not that there is a single clearing price where every project that won the auction is awarded the same price, but it is that the price that you have bidded into the auction and that got covered into the lowest bids that are filled up until the auction volume, you receive the price that you bid into the auction. And maybe a couple of words to the smaller than 1 megawatt auction. You see that there are different ceiling prices for those technologies. So for onshore wind, the ceiling price is well below the full cost for this technology that we see at the moment. And this is why this smaller than 1 megawatt auction is really not a technology neutral auction, but it is a small-scale PV auction, and this is why all these volumes in these auctions, they went all to small-scale PV. And this was pretty dynamic in terms of auctioning in 2016, 2019. But what we saw is that the realization rate from 2016 and 2017 were actually very, very small. So there we see at the moment also a problem in financing, or to find debt financing for these projects. But we expect that this is going to change for the 2018 and 2019 projects, and we hope that we see a realization rate well above 50% for those two auctions. What you can see is that you see decreasing tender results. So LCOEs are decreasing, therefore the auction results are also decreasing. And I think what's also interesting is that if you compare the difference between the minimum price and the cutoff price, is that it's getting narrower. So developers really are more and more able to participate the bidding behavior of other participants in the auction. And what you can also see is that the average price is pretty close to the cutoff price. So people are really able to forecast this auction pretty well. For the large scale auction, this is, I think, the most interesting auction for the next years to come. And what is particularly interesting is that there is no size limit. So for example, in Germany, it's limited to 10 megawatt projects for the auction. So if you want to build bigger, you have to look for a PPA or merchant case, but this is not true for Poland. So when you're developing large-scale PV projects, you can always decide on the way whether you want to participate within the auction or whether you can find an off-taker and also financing for these projects outside of the subsidy scheme. And we didn't see any winning bids from PV in 2018. But in 2019, we saw the first PV projects around 40 megawatts of large-scale solar that won the auction in 2019. Yeah, so this was pretty surprising to some participants, since the cutoff price of 233 zloty per megawatt hour is or was in the last year assumed not to be feasible for any large-scale PV project to be ready in 2019 in the December auction to win some of the bids. But this happened, and we think that if you think about installations that will be ready in 2022. This is also, yeah, let's say around 240 to 250 zloty per megawatt hour. The most competitive projects will be able to also reach these LCOE. What is going to be interesting for this year's auction round, and George asked if there are two, so it's not clear yet if there are two auction rounds or just one auction round. I don't know any more specific on the second date, so sorry, I don't think that there's an update on this. But what is particularly going to be interesting is, of course, who's participating, and what is going to be the competition within this basket. You know, and what you see on this slide is the volume that will be tendered within these auctions. Yeah, so in Poland, it's not the case that you tender megawatt or capacity, but you tender megawatt hours for 15 years time. Yeah, so what you see here, the numbers on the left side are megawatt hours over 15 years. So if you divide the numbers by 15, you will then reach the tendered volume per year for these baskets. And you can see that this large-scale basket, this is the orange share, is going to be by far the most or the biggest basket within the next auction. And so particularly interesting now is yeah, who's going to compete for these volumes? And the government expects that there will be around 700 to 800 megawatt of onshore wind winning these tenders, and around 700, 800 megawatts of large-scale PV that will win a subsidy within this scheme. But from our point of view, we're a bit skeptic about the onshore wind pipeline. So since there is a pretty strict distance rule for a new onshore wind installations in place, the so-called 10H rule, the pipeline for onshore wind pretty much dried out. So what is left for this year's auction is only the leftovers from last year's auction, and we think that it's only 400 to 500 megawatts of fully permitted projects that will be able to compete within this auction, which makes, of course, the share for PV even bigger, and also the competition from onshore wind with lower LCOE compared to PV at this point in time, even lower. So what we expect is that the cutoff price will be higher compared to last year's auction. If you want to learn more about it, you can contact me afterwards. We also have pretty good insights on the project pipeline and expected LCOE, and also pretty stable view on what we think will be the minimum cutoff price and average price in these auctions. Let me jump into the particularities of the CFD remuneration system, which is pretty complicated. As I told you already, the CFD system works this way: that you bid a strike price, which mainly should represent your LCOE for this 15 years time for your project. So this is the orange bubble here. I put it at 280 zloty per megawatt hour, but this is just an example. What you receive from the market are, of course, the energy that you sell to the market, right? So you look for a merchant who's going to integrate your energy into the system, and what you receive from this merchant is power market revenues. And this is what you see on the blue column. In this case, this is 260 zloty per megawatt hour, what you receive from the market. And the CFD is supposed to give you or compensate you for the difference, if there is one, between your strike price, the 280, and what you received in the market, the 260. So this is supposed to be 20. And then, of course, if this would be like the perfect setting, then there wouldn't be any energy market risk or power market risk that you have to take within these 15 years time. The problem is that the regulator URE is guessing what you're earning on the market, and it's guessing pretty badly. So this leads to the fact that URE thinks that you're about 20 zloty per megawatt hour earning less than you actually do, right? So this is somehow a regulatory yield that you see from the CFD auction system. And if you think about strategic bidding, this is, of course, something that you have to incorporate in your bid as well, because you can deduce it or deduct it from your strike price, because the regulator assumes that you're earning less than you actually do. So he compensates you not only for the difference of the 260 and the 280, the 20, but it compensates you even more for this 20 zloty. Why this is, I really don't know why they make it this way. The problem is that banks don't understand it. They just don't get it, and we see it at the moment for clients that seek financing for auctioned onshore wind farms, that the banks still did not understand how the system works and what should be incorporated within the cash flow. And to this is even more technical. I'm very sorry, but this is really a complicated topic. But hopefully this makes it somehow more clear to you. So this what you see in this graph is the difference between what you actually earn in the market and what the regulator assumes that you're earning in the market. So and this the difference can be in some months can be as high as 50 zloty per megawatt hour. Yeah. But if you look at the long-term average, moving average over this period that we were looking at, it levels out to around 20 zloty per megawatt hour. Yeah. So this is at this point in time something that you could or that you should consider also in your bidding strategy for the next tender round. The only problem is that the market fundamentals, why there is this deviation and the amount of this deviation will change over time with the increasing share of PV. Yeah? And so we in our models we see that from the mid 2020s onwards, this surplus is going to change sign in the other direction. Yeah. So for this 15 years time, you have to make an assumption of how this develops, and it is clear that this 20 zloty difference in your favor will eventually at some point in the future change sign, and will be the other way around. And this is something that must be considered also within the cash flow models, and must be explained also to banks and investors what your assumption is, and yeah, why do you think this is the right amount that you could that you should incorporate. One last topic, George already mentioned it. Of course, the merchant case or PPA case, so subsidy-free case, reached Poland in the last 2 years, and George was also talking about the reasons for that, mostly the increasing CO2 prices in the 80% or 75 or 76% coal share generation mix of Poland, where you see when you look only at the red highlighted part of the chart, is what you earned with an average PV profile in euros per megawatt hour over the time of 2015 to 2019, and this increased hugely by 20 euros per megawatt hour from 2017 to 2018 due to this increase in power price level. And but this is technology specific. So at the moment, your revenue, your average revenue from the wholesale market is higher than the average price, because PV is generating in higher price hours, in the peak hours of summer, and therefore you see higher revenues at the moment for PV than you see for the average baseload price. And this amounts to around 63 euros per megawatt hour to 60 euros per megawatt hour in 2019. So this is why many developers are also considering the merchant or subsidy-free case at the moment. But for this year's auction and also the upcoming auction, you don't have to decide before you start developing for what option you're looking for. So you can put your bet on both options, which is pretty neat and makes it pretty flexible for developers also to build a business case around the most competitive projects at the moment. So brief summary. We also expect a very dynamic development of PV capacity in Poland for the next decade, and this is based on 3 business models. Short term, it's behind the meter, yeah. So for micro scale installations up to 50 kilowatt, there are very generous self-consumption rules in place at the moment, which drive this market technology. Short to medium term, it's of course renewable auctions. Onshore wind pipeline dried out, so it's now the time for PV. And if you have a project ready, the next tender round will be pretty good for you. We also expect that there will be tenders in the future, but they weren't announced yet, so this is not sure yet. And then of course merchant PV. So market parity is reached for the most cost-efficient projects at the moment. PPA market is still in its infancy, so banks, off-takers, so utilities, maybe they know from other markets. So, but still banks are not so much aware of it, but they are starting to learn. The learning curve is pretty steep, but I think that it's still different, let's say, compared to the Spanish case, yeah, because in Spain you see differences in market values and LCOE of, let's say, 30 euros per megawatt hour, and in Poland at the moment it's maybe 2 or 3 or 5 euros per megawatt hour. So this is a completely different situation. But since we also expect further decreasing LCOE for the next years, this will become more and more attractive, and this will be the medium business case for large scale PV in Poland. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you. And this was it from my side. So Nicola, please go on.
Thank you very much, Tim. We really had a deep dive in there. So I would say that we can now take, by the way, here are Tim's details. If you want to reach out to him. He'll be also attending the Solar Future Poland. You mentioned alongside with Christian Schnell, you'll be on actually the panel covering the topic of auctions. So you can meet him also in Warsaw on May the 7th. Q&A, we have some questions coming in from the public. Please feel free to add more. I would start maybe one. I would address it to Georg, given that our attendees always like to guess what will be the number of actually the PV capacity installed by 2020. So we had 1.5 gigawatts of PV this year. And Georg, do you think is it actually replicable for 2020? And how much capacity do you think will be added by the end of this year?
Well, it's anybody's guess. I think it's really hard to say, because it's driven to a large extent by these micro installations, where there's of course a lot of activity at this point, and I think it's also very difficult to guess how many. I mean, Tim mentioned that there are financing constraints for projects that have succeeded in the auctions. So I think, and we've seen that from the previous auctions, because let's not forget that there's a 2-year implementation window for these projects, which I think has been extended to 2.5. But yeah, I think there still has been a lot of projects that have not been able to implement their projects historically, and there's also a question mark how many of those that have succeeded in the last 2 auctions will actually get implemented. So it's really anybody's guess. I mean, I think an addition by 1 to 1.5 gigawatt would probably be a safe guess, but it's yeah, given how many variables there are, I think we need a crystal ball. But it will definitely remain. Poland will remain one of the probably the most active solar market in Central Eastern Europe in this year. That I'm willing to bet on.
Thank you. Of course, it's always hard to make guesses. We're all aware. Nevertheless, I would jump to Tim. Tim, question for you. When do you expect an increasing cannibalization effect of PV capture prices?
Yeah, so as I already mentioned, so the question aims at the thing that I mentioned about what you earn with a PV profile or PV project in the power market compared to the average price. Yeah, and at the moment we see a surplus of 12% for a PV profile compared to average prices. But we see already in markets in Europe with higher shares of PV, we see profiles with a deduction of 20% compared to average prices. Yeah, so not 112%, but 80%. And this largely depends, of course, on the speed of the project pipeline, how fast it will build up, and also then, of course, the realized installations. So we expect from the mid 2020s onwards that there won't be any more surplus between average price or for a PV profile of compared to average prices, and then the trend is of course going down.
Thank you, Tim. I would say we have still more time for one question for Georg and one for Tim. I would start again with Georg again. Georg, what is your view on current LCOE for large PV installations?
Well, we are running certain simulations. I mean, Tim suggested that the difference between LCU and market prices is somewhere between 2 and 5 euros. So the LCU is below current market prices, and this is basically where also our simulations are heading. Yeah, so based on our calculations, we are below the. We believe we can get to, based on an achievable cost of capital, we are able to get. Believe that we will end up with on large scale projects by approximately that margin below current market prices. And of course, we do hope by the time we will implement those projects we are developing and starting to develop now, so let's say 18 to 24 months down the road, that our LCOE will be lower again, that also funding costs may improve in Poland, and that gap will widen. So we see, depending on assumptions, we see our LCOE numbers now somewhere around 230, or between 220 and 240 zlotys.
So in line, as you mentioned, with Tim's forecast. So
yes.
Good to know. I will wrap up then with Tim with one last question for you regarding the contract for difference tender system. So does it also cover PV installations subject to corporate PPAs, or are there any requirements on how the electricity from PV installation is sold?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, absolutely, because it was quite long and extensive. So absolutely.
Yeah.
So it regards the contract for difference tender system, and specifically, will it also cover PV installations subject to corporate PPAs, or are there any requirements on how the electricity from the PV installation is sold?
Yeah, so you yourself, you have to make sure that the energy is sold in the market, and you do that by asking a merchant, Statkraft or Nextkraftwerke or whatever merchant you can think about, to sell your energy that you produce with this project to the wholesale market. And this holds for both business cases or possible business cases. You can do that with a corporate PPA or utility PPA, and you have to do this as well for the CFD system. So you can actually do both. Yeah, you can bid for let's say a minimum price that you need for bank financing in the CFD auction, and then you can look for utility or a corporate off-taker that provides you with an PPA, pay as produced PPA with an even higher remuneration. And this is of course there are some pitfalls to it, but this is really also a very likely model for operation for the upcoming auctions.
Good to know. And I would say one last question to fill the hours. We'll make a round number. Gentlemen, let me know who wants to take it. Do you expect limitation about domestic debt finance availability?
Was this for me, the question, or for Georg?
I would say whoever wants to take it, probably you, Georg, when it comes to domestic debt finance availability, do you think it will be constrained?
Well, I mean, the way we see it is that solar being such a new asset class in Poland, and there also having been some negative experience by banks in relation to wind projects in the past, I think it's not. I don't think that we are in a situation where the banks have reached the exposure limits to the sector, but they're only now starting to gain exposure to the sector and gaining experience. I think now a reasonable number of banks have started to understand, and to quote Tim, not fully in all aspects and all details, but I think they're now, more and more of them are getting comfortable with the auction system. So I think the market in terms of bank financing is still at the very beginning. And I think the next challenge will be to get the banks to understand corporate PPAs and ultimately a merchant approach. So I think now it's more about them getting along the learning curve than there being physically mixed in terms of industry exposure. So I think that's where we are. And ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is also something we are considering. I mean, the Polish capital market is relatively well developed, so I also believe that that could be a source of funding in the medium to long term future.
Thank you, Georg. And we will also mention the topic of bankability of solar in Poland at the Solar Future Poland event. Gentlemen, I would really like to thank you for taking part in this webinar. I think we gave us some really precious insights. Well, what can I say? We will all see each other at the Solar Future Poland. So once again, we renew the invitation. Stay in touch with us with Solarplaza. Both Tim and Georg will be at the event. So Georg and Tim, thank you again very much for taking part in the webinar.
Our pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, and we'll see each other in Warsaw. Thank you all to all the attendees, and hope to see you in Warsaw.